Balasu casually walked along the trail leading him to the upper pastures. Even after making this hike thousands of times in his 19 winters, he never got tired of it. The weather on Plavu was pleasant year-round. The region where his family raised livestock was especially mild, with just enough rain to keep the valley verdant, but not enough to feel oppressive. Balasu especially enjoyed mornings after a rainstorm had passed. The air was fragrant from the scents of flowers and grasses floating on the breeze. The air felt clean, and the dust was laid low. It would also make his family's arcs calmer and easier to watch. They'd spend the entire day cropping the thick grasses of the pasture and not wander into the woods. It always annoyed Balasu to have to chase a wandering arc back to the herd. His sister Shala had minded the herd overnight, so he didn't have to worry about rounding them up in the morning. She'd taken his turn last night while he helped his father replace a section of fencing taken out by an out-of-control hover truck. The light from the local star was just beginning to shine over the horizon when he finally reached their pasture. He was surprised to see the entire herd clustered in the center of the pasture and facing outward. He didn't see his sister right away, but she could still be in the hut on the far side of the pasture. It was just a simple bed and stove to keep warm overnight or in the winter. He started walking towards it and saw the door was shut, so he thought he'd sneak up and scare her. But she wasn't there. He looked around in confusion when he noticed a spot where the grass appeared to be pressed down. As he made his way over, a strange scent caught his attention. He glimpsed a piece of cloth and stopped abruptly as he neared the spot. Staring for a moment, he felt a wave of nausea before turning away and being overcome by the urge to vomit. His sister's still form lay in a pool of dark liquid, her body showing severe signs of injury. It took him a moment to notice that her head was no longer there. He dropped his backpack and ran back home, yelling for his father. Jonathan Compton finished reading the first case from the file sent to him by the colonial administrator of Plavu, a small Mifui agricultural colony in the Mahina sector. They were plagued by an unknown entity viciously killing people on Plavu, and all attempts to catch it had failed. Shala was just the first victim of a reign of terror gripping the region of Gabali. In just the first 3 months alone, 42 settlers were found horrifically killed, similar to Shala. So far, no one has survived an attack to give an accurate description of the culprit. Rumor abounded in every settlement in the region. It was an animal, it was a psycho killer, someone from another region or even someone from another world. While alien visitors were infrequent, traders and scholars would come to visit. The colonial administrator had been given his name by one of the soldiers sent to hunt down the killer, but they failed. The soldier, one CPL Sumalki, recommended he get a human hunter and gave his name to the administrator, and so Compton reviewed the case to see if he wanted to investigate it. His reputation was such that he could pick and choose his jobs. He'd been a hunter since he was 5 years old. His grandfather had taught him the basics of hunting, tracking, living off the land, and traveling the old-fashioned way of map and compass. His grandfather was a traditionalist and preferred the old ways of relying on your 5 senses and personal knowledge over technology, like scanners, satellite tracking, and fancy weapons. The last meant he'd been well-trained in using bows, crossbows, shotguns, bare-bones hunting rifles with only a scope added, and even spears for boar hunting. As he grew older, he picked up skills that were useful outside of Terran territory during his time in the Terran military. Survival skills for alien worlds, xenobiology, xenozoology, usage of advanced technology, and advanced combat skills. He spent 15 years as a scout, tracker, fugitive hunter, sniper, and occasional assassin. Over the years, he had gained many useful contacts with Terran and several alien militaries and governments. It sometimes allowed him access to information not usually shared with outsiders. As he read the testimonies of possible sightings and the complete files of each attack, he became more interested in the case. The patterns suggested several possibilities of what was committing the attacks, but other parts of the case were baffling. CPL Sumalki was an old friend and more than up for the task of dealing with those potentials. A chance at hunting something new intrigued him, but the more he read, the more convinced he became that despite parts of the victims being consumed, these killings were not made to feed. They were done because it enjoyed the killing and it wouldn't stop on its own. Compton stretched as he got off the shuttle that had brought him here. It took 2 days to reach Plavu, and he was happy to breathe air that hadn't been recycled too many times. He was greeted by an aide to the administrator and by Sipil Samalki, his face bearing a big smile as the two embraced. "Good to see you, my old friend," Compton said. Sipil Samalki returned the greeting and turned to indicate to the administrator, "Jonathan, this is Atang, an aide to the colony's administrator." "Thank you for agreeing to come in our hour of need," Atang added. "Have there been any attacks while I was traveling?" Compton asked. Atang replied, "There have been 2 attacks and a few sightings of something strange in the area, but the descriptions vary." "Where are the bodies?" Compton inquired. Atang replied, "At the local healing center." "Take me there then. I want to examine them." Compton turned to his old friend. "So tell me why you need my help. There are several other trackers closer to this system, and you're damn good yourself." Sipil Samalki smiled at the compliment and answered him, "We've been unable to track it by the usual means. Thermal and radar scanners on the ground and air pick up nothing. Motion-activated cameras do not activate." The CPL continued, "We've got nothing but a few traces of blood from their victims, but that trails off in a few steps. I consulted with Barrick and Fair for ideas. They both agreed with my idea to call you. Oh, and Barrick says you still owe him 50 credits from that poker game last month." The CPL laughed as he said it. "Since all the new ways have failed, we decided it was time for a hunter. You are the best to do it by the old ways. Maybe you'll find something we've missed." He finished. Compton stroked his chin. "This gets more interesting by the moment if 3 of the best trackers can't find anything. I'm flattered y'all thought of me and I'll give it a shot." Compton could smell the victims before he even saw them. He thought he smelled something off about the bodies, something not part of the usual decomposition process. But not being familiar with the anatomy of the Mfue or their death rituals, he just wasn't sure. He spoke with the coroner for a moment before personally examining the bodies. The coroner said the first victim was missing both hearts and had been killed by having her head crushed. But the second one still had their hearts but no liver, and it tore out his throat. Compton finished but continued to examine the bodies. "I'll need to—" His voice trailed off as he looked more intently at one of the bodies. With a worried look on his face, Compton turned to Sipil Samalki. "Why don't the 3 of you wait outside?" he said in a tone that indicated it wasn't a request. But before he could leave, he had the coroner share the reports of all the other victims. As he headed for the door, Sipil Samalki turned to Compton. "You have an idea what it is?" As he closed the door, Compton answered the question. "I really hope I'm wrong." It was over 3 hours later before Compton emerged from the examination room. His face was a mix of confusion and dread as he turned to face them. He nodded at the coroner. "Your records are very well done. They were very helpful." Sipil Samalki asked, "Was it what you thought?" At the same time, Atang asked what it was. "Yes, it is, and it's not supposed to be here," Compton replied, unable to hide the worry in his voice. "This planet?" the coroner asked. "This sector," Compton replied. "Atang, have there been any ships from the Jintokak sector since shortly before the killings started?" he asked. Before Atang could answer the question, Sipil Samalki interrupted. "Jintokaks, it can't be. They were all killed." "I know, I was there. But everything points to a Nisix, and even worse, a big one," Compton continued. "His records are comprehensive, and I matched the bite patterns of a Nisix. It also explains why you and the others were unable to trap or track it." Before Atang could ask, Compton explained, "Nisix are a highly intelligent apex predator species that used to inhabit a system in the Jintokak sector. About 2 centuries ago, some idiots discovered them and thought they were perfect for the fighting pits on Galanor 6. Atang interrupted. "Fighting pits? Isn't Galanor 6 uninhabitable?" "Yes, the Nisix got loose and within a standard year had overrun the planet. Standard suppression methods failed and failed badly. They killed over 50,000 civilians and soldiers before the planet was evacuated and glassed, and even that had to be done 3 times to get them all. Even the best anti-rad suits won't last long due to the amount of lethal radiation in the soil and the air on Galanor 6 now, Compton answered. Take me to the latest kill site. I'll explain the rest on the way, he ordered. Compton picked up his explanation as the hovercar took them to the last attack site. As I said before, the Nisix is a highly evolved apex predator that is smart, strong, and fast. They are usually solitary hunters, except when they are raising their young. They are cold-blooded, which is probably why the thermals failed. They can manipulate electromagnetic fields around their body to detect other energy fields, like prey or danger. They can detect the sensors and either avoid them or use their ability to camouflage themselves. They can glide for a short distance, which might explain the lack of tracks leading to the attack. What do they look like? Atang asked. They are about 2 meters tall, 2 long arms that end in a 4-digit paw and long claws. They have a smaller pair of appendages that have a membrane on the underside that could be extended like wings, but they could only glide with them, not actually fly. Compton explained, they are bipedal with feet with 3 toes forward and 2 facing back. They all end in a nasty talon that will easily gut an orc. Their muzzle is slightly elongated with hook-shaped teeth to help them rip apart prey. They have 6 eyes that we assume are normal, low light, and thermal. Their ears are large and triangular with long hairs off the edges that detect vibration. We're not exactly sure how they detect and manipulate the energy fields around their body. Compton fiddled with the rifle as he talked. Which is why I brought this. It fires a solid projectile that is expelled by a chemical process. The Nisix can't detect this like other energy weapons. The body was at the edge of a small clearing, a basket of taro berries on its side next to her. She appeared to be young, but the damage to the body made it hard to be sure. She'd been ripped open and her guts scattered everywhere. Her hearts and liver were missing as well as her eyes. As Compton examined the body, a pair of hover vehicles pulled up. He recognized 2 of them from the coroner's office, here to transport the body back, he assumed. The other 2 wore uniforms of an unfamiliar look and started to walk towards him. Sumalki, you and Atang go keep them back until I am done here, he said. CPL Sumalki sketched a salute and grabbed Atang's arm. After finishing his examination, Compton began scanning the ground around the body. He began to walk in a circular fashion that grew as he completed each circle. The look on his face got grimmer with every circle. Nothing. No tracks, no crushed grass, broken sticks, or indentations to mark the passage of anything bigger than the local version of a Terran squirrel. The only marks were directly near and on the body. It didn't make any sense. The Nisix could only use their wings to glide like the flying squirrels on Terra. So that explained the lack of tracks to the victim, but not the lack from leaving the body. He began searching the nearby trees until he found what he was looking for. A large branch with deep gouges from being gripped by something with sharp talons. The branch also showed signs that whatever sat on it was heavy. Searching the ground under the branch, he found some spoor with what appeared to be shredded cloth in it. It put the spoor in one of the disposable bags he carried for instances like this, but he was unable to find any other sign of his prey to indicate it had climbed this tree or the ones nearby. He returned to the body and compared the strips of cloth he found with what the victim was wearing. They didn't match, so those were from another victim. Compton was quiet for the entire trip back to the healing center. His mind was still trying to process all the things he found at the site of the attack with what he already knew. A plan was just beginning to form in his mind when the hovercar arrived at the healing center. Upon arrival, he pulled the coroner aside and briefly spoke with him. After a shocked look on his face and another quick word from Compton, the coroner just nodded his head and hurried through the entrance. He then walked over to join Sipel Sumalki and Atang as they entered the building. A trap, Compton stated without any sort of preamble. Atang's confused look, he explained. We're going to set a trap for the beast. Sipel Sumalki interjected. We've tried that, but it hasn't shown any interest in the bait we used. I know, I read your report. Compton replied. We're going to use a body as bait. We tried that as well, Sipel Sumalki stated, with a couple of its victims, but it never returned. That's why we are going to use a live body as bait, Compton said. At this, both Atang and CPL Samalki was silent with surprise. Live? Atang finally got out. Yes, let me explain, Compton stated. I have the coroner searching for any recently dead that are still intact in a healing center. The kind with no family. You can't do that. It's monstrous and immoral, Atang shouted. And if then what? CPL Samalki asked. Then we reanimate a dead one, Compton simply stated. Wait, what? CPL Samalki asked, utterly confused. That's not possible, Atang replied at the same time. Compton explained, It's not much different than keeping a brain-dead person's body functioning. He continued, We implant something to stimulate the heart enough to get the fresh blood added to the body moving. It's not as good as a functioning body, but it might work. And we'll run rods through the body to keep it upright like a shepherdess tending her flock. I'm hoping the body emits an actual energy signature that is enough to confuse the Nysix into thinking it's prey. He finished. CPL Samalki looked thoughtful. Will you poison the body? He asked. Yes, as a secondary option, but I'm going to be posted up in a nearby tree with my rifle, Compton answered. Atang spoke up. But won't it just detect your energy signal? Compton walked over to one of his bags and pulled out a large tan object with bits of flora stuck on it. We call this a ghillie suit. It's mainly used by our snipers as a form of camouflage. Turning the suit to show the interior, it's lined with a material that blocks any kind of energy signature, thermal, electrical, or magnetic. Having only seen one suit before, CPL Samalki examined it with lively interest. Seeing Atang's still confused look, Compton explained, I wear this suit and attach bits and pieces of the plants close to where I am. As long as I remain perfectly motionless, you should only spot me by knowing where I am. At the coroner's return, Compton asked, Did we find a good one? Still not looking entirely convinced, he just shook his head yes. So now we reanimate a dead one. He replied. Compton clapped his hands together once. Good, we're in business. Now we just need to find the right spot. The next couple of days were spent locating the right spot. Upon hearing of the search, Shala's father and brother insisted they use their pasture and even their herd of aurochs to sell the disguise better. He picked a tree at the edge of the meadow, slightly separated from the other trees by several meters, allowing him a nearly 360-degree view. A small platform was built and attached to the tree about 4 meters off the ground, just big enough for him to lie prone on. They waited 2 more days to allow the scent of the workers to dissipate, and the body was prepared. Nysix were crepuscular predators, preferring to hunt around dusk and dawn. Many of the reports confirmed that and showed a marked preference to attack around dawn. So the day before, Compton showered and thoroughly scrubbed his body with unscented soap to remove as much of the smell from his body as possible. He showered again with just plain water not long before it was time. He donned his heavy-duty hunting outfit, created from a tough cloth that had ceramic plates sewn into spots on the torso, quads, and upper and lower arms. Between the two, it prevented punctures by claws, teeth, or talons of most creatures or other sharp objects. He took a moment to roll around briefly at the edge of the meadow to hopefully further cover his scent. He next donned the ghillie suit, and CPL Samalki used a sensor to make sure it was blocking his heat and energy signatures. As that was being done, Atang was directing a pair of soldiers to set up the live bait around 150 meters from the stand. He still had his misgivings but was willing to set aside his morals for the chance to stop the killing. After adding some pieces of grass and leaves to the outer part of the suit, Compton adjusted the holster for his handgun and checked both weapons and their ammo before holstering the handgun. Atang was surprised upon seeing Compton cleaning and preparing the handgun earlier in the day. He didn't understand why carried such an antique-looking weapon. Compton explained it had been his grandfather's and carried it for luck. He also demonstrated its effectiveness by turning a very large rock near the farmhouse they stayed in into hundreds of rocks smaller than his head. He explained it fired specially designed explosive rounds propelled by a small chemical rocket at the base. Against anything smaller than a hover car, it lost much of its accuracy after 20 meters. But it packed one hell of a punch when it hit and made the perfect weapon for finishing off wounded prey or close-in defense. Unfortunately, the size of the rounds meant it only had 4 shots. It was around 5 hours until dawn when he climbed the tree and settled into place. It took a few seconds of adjustment to find the position he wanted without his handgun or the knife in his boot annoying him or interfering with his movement. He then settled down to silently wait for his target. CPL Sumalki, Atang, and the two soldiers retreated to the little cabin at the edge of the meadow. The walls and roof had been covered in material that blocked their heat and energy signatures. Compton had lain practically motionless for hours before the sky began to lighten from the local star. A slight flicker of movement caught his eye. It was on the right side of the clearing from his position and around 50 meters out. Whatever it was moved slowly but deliberately, carefully examining its surroundings. He watched as a large shape burst out of the trees and glided almost soundlessly at the bait. Compton watched as it hit the bait hard, drove it to the ground, and bit into the bait. There was just enough light to make out a large Nisix tearing into the body, an adult male, judging by the size. With a feral grin, Compton slowly moved his rifle into position, lined up his shot, and set his finger on the trigger. Any lesser hunter would have died at that moment, but something caused him to suddenly roll off the side of the platform and see a large shape pass through where he'd lain a moment ago. As he fell, he fired a shot wildly into the air, hoping it would scare the predator enough to give him a chance to recover. He hit the ground hard, landing on his back and protected from serious injury by the plates in his clothing. Luckily, it didn't knock the wind out of him. He hit the quick-release toggle for his suit and looked for his rifle. Not seeing it, he drew his pistol and rolled into a crouching position. He scanned every direction for his attacker, and movement in the meadow drew his eye. The Nisix had turned toward him and was looking at him, blood and gore dripping down its body. He swore he could sense the malice coming off this thing as it approached him. Once again, he couldn't say what made him do it, but he dropped to the ground as something huge passed over him. Without time to aim, he blindly fired his pistol and was rewarded with a cry of anger, surprise, and pain. A huge shape hit the ground less than 15 meters from him and didn't move. The Nisix had remained in the same spot, staring at him with no indication of fear of the blast. He turned back to the other creature and saw an even larger Nisix in a crumpled heap. "Son of a bitch," Compton muttered to himself. "There are two of them, and the bastard set a trap for me." A noise from the downed Nisix caught his attention, and he watched it rise on two legs. Compton raised his pistol but stopped in shock as it turned and he saw its wounds begin to heal. The first Nisix roared as it charged him, but it was a distraction to allow the other one to escape. The sound of the door to the shelter being slammed open startled the charging Nisix. Compton heard the whine of their energy rifles charging, and that was enough to scare both Nisix. Once again, he got a nasty surprise as both Nisix flapped their secondary appendages and began to rise off the ground. The damn things could fly, not just glide, but actually fly. He was too shocked to even fire at them. "Well, this isn't good," he muttered to himself.